Here we go.
Victoria, you
Recording
can let me know
in
when
progress.
everyone is in. Are we ready?
Everyone's in and we are now recording.
Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited today, and we would like to welcome you and thank you for joining this dissertation defense. My name is Dr. Rodlin Luter. I am the faculty lead for the dissertation part of the International Psychology program. And today I'm just going to go over a few ground rules for the dissertation. Our candidate today will have 20 minutes to present, and that will be followed by a 30-minute question and answer period by his committee. And then we will open it up to the general public. Now, during his presentation, we do ask, and everyone has already beat me to the punch, so I'm just going to say it because I have to. We do ask that everyone have their cameras and microphones muted. And the only person that we will see during the presentation will be Devin. And then after, when his committee will show their cameras and have their microphones open during their question and answer period. At the end of the open 10-minute period for the general public, then we will ask everyone to leave and the committee will remain to deliberate. With that being said, on behalf of the Chicago Schools International Psychology Department, we cannot thank you enough for attending today. A dissertation defense is really a culmination of many years of hard work and dedication. And so your attendance today really means everything, not only for our candidate today, but for the department and our institution. And so we thank you so much for all of your support. And so now I am going to turn it over to Dr. Pip McGurl. She is the dissertation chair today, and she will go ahead and proceed with introducing the committee along with our candidate. Thank you, Dr. McGurl. The show is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Luter. So welcome everybody to Devin's dissertation defense. It's been a long and winding road, as they say, all through the pandemic and navigating a number of hurdles. But we're here today and to bring this to a successful conclusion. So my name is Dr. Pip McGurl. I'm professor with school psychology and adjunct with international psychology. And I first met Devin a long time ago on one of the field experiences to Rwanda when I was lead for the Rwanda field experience. So that I was trying to work out when it was, and I think it was 2018, which is quite a long time ago. So hanging in there, congratulations. So let me introduce other committee members, and I'll go the order that they're on my screen. So we have Dr. Michael Dendato, who is Associate Professor and Interim Dean for Research at the School of Social Work at Loyola University. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Robert Cleave, who's Associate Professor, Creativity Studies Specialism Coordinator in the Department of Humanistic Psychology at Sable University, formerly of the International Psychology Department at the Chicago School. So welcome again to you both, and thank you for all your support throughout this process. And last but not least, Devin Bercaw, defending doctoral student today. So I'm going to hand over to you, Devin, and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. So thank you all for coming to my defense, which is titled, as you can see, Health Experiences of MSM in Rwanda, an Interpretative Phenomenological Analysis. So first, I'd like to thank Dr. Cleave and Dr. Dentato for being part of my committee. Your expertise in LGBTQ+ research has been very useful. You both have played an integral role in helping me create a dissertation that I'm very proud of. Dr. Pip, as you said, I met you during the Rwanda field experience, and at that time I'd already written the first 2 chapters of my dissertation, but that experience in Rwanda caused me to kind of rethink things and compelled me to start over. And you've been with me ever since through all the ups and downs, kept me going many times when I felt like there was not an end in sight. Thank my family and friends as well who've supported me throughout this. A few of you, I think, are on: Nikki, Heather, Diane. Hopefully only a few more weeks of having to listen to me talk about this stuff. Okay, so we'll start with a statement of the problem. LGBTQ plus people in Africa face many challenges due to their sexual minority and concealable stigmatized identity, or CSI status. Discrimination, oppression, and violence against LGBTQ people in African countries like Uganda have been well documented. Many studies have shown African LGBTQ plus populations to suffer disproportionately from HIV and depression, as well as a lack of access to fundamental services, including culturally sensitive healthcare. Even where services exist in more LGBTQ plus friendly countries like South Africa, healthcare and other providers often lack the education about LGBTQ culture and issues, are not adequately trained to work with LGBTQ plus people, and sometimes openly discriminate against them. While there is some existing research related to issues concerning LGBTQ plus populations in places like South Africa, research related to the plight of this population, men who have sex with men, or MSM, and self-identified gay men in sub-Saharan Africa, or SSA, and countries like Rwanda is extremely limited. Very little research related to the SSA LGBTQ plus population's access to culturally affirmative medical and mental health care and other services. And the research that does exist generally paints a pretty poor picture. To the best of my knowledge, no research regarding the Rwandan MSM and self-identified gay male populations' access to these types of services and their corresponding well-being currently exists. This study filled a gap in the cultural psychology literature and facilitated a discussion centered on structural, systemic, and other changes in Rwanda that may positively impact the LGBTQ plus community. It identified the extent to which healthcare workers in Rwanda lack LGBTQ plus specific training, and where there are gaps in access to culturally sensitive healthcare services that are vital to these populations. This study provides a framework for future research and interventions that may help improve the overall well-being of LGBTQ plus people in Rwanda. 2 primary research questions guided the study. The first is, what are the health needs and experiences of MSM and self-identified gay men living in Rwanda? The second is, do the medical and mental health care experiences of MSM and self-identified gay men living in Rwanda impact their well-being? A review of the literature shows that LGBTQ plus people are at increased risk of a variety of mental, physical, emotional, and social health issues compared to the general population. Lack of equality and access to basic necessities like medical and mental health care and social resources contributes to an overall decline in the well-being of LGBTQ plus people. Discrimination and oppression against these populations continues to be a significant problem in both developed and developing areas of the world, despite major gains in recent years. LGBTQ plus people living in Africa are among the most oppressed and marginalized populations in the world. Homosexuality was illegal in 35 African countries as of 2018, and 28 African countries have laws penalizing same-sex relationships. Homosexuality also continues to be punishable by death in 4 African countries. LGBTQ plus people are often forced to hide their sexual and gender identities to minimize oppression and discrimination in much of Africa, including Rwanda. They often face barriers in accessing medical and mental health care and are sometimes exposed to violence and threat of various forms of social and systemic persecution and death because of their sexual minority status. While homosexuality is not technically criminalized in Rwanda, LGBTQ plus rights are also not largely promoted there, and LGBTQ plus Rwandans often have to conceal their identities to avoid persecution. Very little information related to LGBTQ plus specific healthcare in Africa exists, and even less research has examined the topic as it's related to the MSM and self-identified gay male population in Rwanda. IPA, interpretative phenomenological analysis, was chosen as the foundation for this study. While quantitative studies tend to value numbers and closed-ended questions, qualitative methods like IPA rely on open-ended questions and the written and spoken word of participants to explore and understand the meaning individuals or groups ascribe to certain phenomena and experiences. Key concepts from cultural, international, and transformative psychology also supplemented the foundational principles of IPA. The cultural psychology concepts of macro and micro psychology were selected because of their relevance in assessing how individual, cultural, and systemic factors might impact participants. Several international psychology diversity core concepts were also used because of their relevance to the population. We'll get into those more later. Transformative psychology was also used because it provided an empowerment, advocacy, and social justice-based lens from which to interpret the needs and experiences and promote the well-being of the study population. The study included a sample of 6 and utilized purposive sampling to obtain participants based on IPA guidelines. Participants were recruited through referrals from a healthcare organization that provides limited services to the LGBTQ+ population in Rwanda, and participants were offered a stipend of $10 to participate. A letter of support was obtained from the clinical site, who pre-screened potential participants using a notice of study and screening questionnaire. Data was collected through individual interviews that lasted about 60 minutes. Participants provided written informed consent at the beginning of their interviews, after which additional information was obtained using a demographic information questionnaire. A short interview schedule comprised of 11 open-ended questions was then used to loosely structure the interviews based on IPA guidelines. The study followed Smith et al.'s 2009 framework for data analysis, which included a line-by-line analysis of transcripts of participant interviews, hand coding using colors and symbols for differentiation, the identification of emergent patterns and themes, the development of interpretative accounts of coded data, the development of a structure that highlighted relationships between themes, and organizing data in a way that allowed analyses to be traced from the raw transcripts to the final structuring of themes. We'll look at a little bit more in a bit. Study also used Lincoln and Guba's criteria for judging qualitative research. Credibility was initially to be achieved via member checking, which would have allowed participants to review their interview transcripts and provide feedback, but this was ultimately deemed impossible because of some logistical concerns after data collection. Transferability was addressed by analyzing the extent to which study findings were relevant in other contexts and by making recommendations, which you'll hear later, for future studies to expand on this research. Dr. Pip was designated as a researcher to review the inquiry process, study findings and conclusions, to assess consistency and dependability, and determine there were no biases or distortions that significantly impacted confirmability. With that, we'll move on to the results analysis and discussion portion of the presentation. Just a brief overview of demographic information that was collected. All participants lived in Kigali, Rwanda at the time of data collection and were born in Rwanda. Ages ranged from 19 to 50 years with a mean age of 29. 3 participants identified their religion as Catholic, 1 as Adventist, 1 as Anglican, and 1 as having no religious affiliation. Education level ranged from primary level 6 to having a bachelor's degree. 5 participants identified their sexual orientation as gay and 1 as MSM. 3 participants endorsed being employed. 1 was an unemployed student and 1 was seeking employment. So these are the superordinate and subordinate themes identified during the IPA hand coding process. Essentially, we have the overarching themes on the left and the sub-themes on the right. I'm not going to go into more detail here because we're going to talk about it in the following slides, but essentially the stuff on the left is going to guide the discussion. So we'll start with the first superordinate theme from the previous slide, medical healthcare experiences. 5 out of 6 participants said they have had or know someone who has had negative experiences seeking medical healthcare in Rwanda as a result of being LGBTQ+. 2 participants said these experiences made them less likely to seek treatment in the future, even when it was medically necessary. 2 participants said these experiences had a negative impact on their mental and emotional well-being, which included feelings of sadness, depression, embarrassment, grief, humiliation, and loneliness, or feeling judged, ridiculed, or dehumanized. 1 participant said negative experiences impacted his desire to live and contributed to suicide ideation. Other barriers like geographic location and ability to pay for care at private clinics forced some participants to delay or avoid care altogether when they may have otherwise sought the care. 1 participant was told he was evil by medical providers because he was gay. Half of participants said they or someone they know had their confidentiality violated in medical settings because of their LGBTQ+ identity. Many participants believe these negative belief systems were largely driven by religion and a lack of awareness surrounding the needs of LGBTQ+ people. It is notable that all participants also endorsed having positive medical healthcare experiences at some point in their lives, but the experiences were generally either while concealing their sexual orientation in public healthcare settings or receiving treatment in private clinics that specifically offered LGBTQ+ affirming care. Half of study participants said they never received traditional mental health services, and when they did, they sometimes concealed their identities to avoid stigma and discrimination, or had negative experiences when they did disclose them, which had a negative impact on their well-being. Participants generally also had difficulty finding LGBTQ+ affirming care, and in one instance, a participant said mental health care providers told them that they did not even treat people from the LGBTQ+ community when they were trying to seek care. Some participants also said they received HIV and STD counseling services through the clinical site in the past, and described the experiences as being very positive, but identified a need for the services to be expanded to include general medical and mental health care that is relevant to them. All participants said they've actively concealed their MSM or gay identities from friends or family to avoid negative consequences, like being stigmatized, shamed, alienated, abandoned, or otherwise harmed. Many participants who were outed or had their sexual identities disclosed by other people against their will reported having negative experiences with friends and family, which included being verbally abused, bullied, and mentally and physically manipulated. These experiences tended to have a negative impact on well-being, which included feeling sad, depressed, anxious, and suicidal. And some participants also reported the experiences had a negative impact on their mental health or their physical health. Most participants also said they concealed their MSM or gay identities in school settings to avoid stigma and discrimination and from being suspended from school. Half of participants said they avoided disclosure in workplaces to prevent stigma and discrimination and losing their jobs. Participants who concealed their identities in schools and workplaces appear to have largely avoided negative consequences by concealing their identities, but that likely had a negative impact on their well-being. Several participants described unsafe conditions they encountered in schools after disclosing their identities or being outed, and others described ways in which Rwandan employers harassed LGBTQ+ employees or created hostile work environments in an effort to force them to resign. All participants said they faced prejudice, discrimination, and stigma in Rwanda, and many believe religion, as I said, was a primary reason. This was really important because 97.4% of Rwandans have a religious affiliation. Some participants were also told that being MSM or gay is a mental illness, and many said they believed lack of cultural awareness of LGBTQ+ issues may cause Rwandans to openly discriminate against them. The majority of participants also said they believe transgender women are the most discriminated against segment of the LGBTQ+ population in Rwanda. 5 participants said they believe Rwandan law protects LGBTQ+ people, but some noted they were unaware of a law specifically addressing the population. As I said earlier, this is partially accurate as Rwandan law appears to prohibit discrimination against any Rwandan. But while this may help shield LGBTQ+ people from some forms of discrimination, it may be challenged in Rwandan courts. because it does not specifically mention LGBTQ plus people as a protected class. The vagueness of the law may also provide organizations like mental and medical health care facilities, law enforcement, leverage under which to discriminate against LGBTQ plus people and exclude them from vital services. Rwanda appears to lack macro-level policies and laws at the local, regional, and national levels to protect the rights of LGBTQ plus people and make discrimination illegal. Economic oppression and religious persecution due to transphobia and homophobia also appears to be a major problem. Micro-level, person-centered concerns, such as how participants construct individual meaning about their sexual orientation, is also important to consider. All participants reported facing stigma or discrimination in various areas of Rwandan society, which caused some participants to devalue themselves and construct a negative self-image. Macro and micro level pressures clearly had an impact, a negative impact on the healthcare experiences and the overall well-being of participants. Several international psychology core diversity concepts also played a significant role. Identity/self refers to similarities and differences between individuals and cultures. The culturally specific beliefs and attitudes and behaviors in Rwanda clearly played a role in the marginalization of participants. As I discussed before, religion and lack of awareness of LGBTQ plus people seem to be driving forces of stigma and discrimination. Negative prejudices and stereotypes, often held by people in positions of power and privilege, those with heterosexual identities in particular, clearly serve to disempower and oppress participants. Rwanda is also one of the poorest countries in the world, which may have limited the economic power of participants. Gender also clearly played an important role. As I said, as most participants believe trans women are often the most marginalized group in the LGBTQ plus community in Rwanda. So before we move on to recommendations, we'll talk about some of the limitations of the study. Travel restrictions due to COVID-19 prevented me from traveling to Rwanda to conduct interviews in person, so I only participated in the first interview, and that was done virtually, which could have inhibited data collection. Audio was recorded for all interviews, but video was mistakenly only recorded for the first. As a result, some valuable cues related to body language could have been lost in translation during the translation process. One participant who identified as trans and another who identified as gender nonconforming were ultimately excluded from the study after being interviewed because it was deemed they no longer met the study's inclusion and exclusion criteria. Unfortunately, this led to the silencing of these voices of these two potential participants whose trans and gender nonconforming identities already caused them to be silenced, ignored, and oppressed in much of society. It's vital that future research address their needs and the needs of the larger LGBTQ plus population. Researcher biases also had the potential to negatively impact the process, but I was consulting a lot with the research associate and the clinical site and my dissertation chair to avoid many of these pitfalls. And just by the nature of how participants were recruited by the clinical site, all living in Rwanda, that obviously limits, generalizability of the findings. And as I said earlier, follow-up via member checking was ultimately not deemed possible for logistical concerns. So it was a missed opportunity to allow participants to clarify some of the study data. So recommendations, transformative psychology promotes the empowerment of disadvantaged populations and betterment of society as a whole, and advocates for social change and provides the foundation for the recommendations that follow. First, university-based healthcare programs in Rwanda should create curricula that includes coursework and training related to LGBTQ plus medical and mental health care concerns and providing culturally competent and affirmative care for LGBTQ plus people. Rwandan healthcare facilities, especially public institutions, should also review and update policies and procedures to prohibit discrimination against LGBTQ plus patients. They should also openly hire LGBTQ plus people to increase visibility and include training for employees related to providing culturally competent care for LGBTQ plus patients. Facilities providing HIV and STD services for LGBTQ plus people should also expand their programming to include culturally competent general medical and mental health care and future funding should expand access to public and private facilities providing LGBTQ plus affirmative care. Future interventions should also include cultural sensitivity campaigns designed to raise awareness surrounding LGBTQ plus issues and rights. And finally, as we talked about, Rwandan law does not clearly state LGBTQ plus people cannot be discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. This requires a call to action to advocate for changes in Rwandan policies and laws, and for advocacy to actively promote LGBTQ plus rights like gay marriage, same-sex marriage. All of these recommendations are suggested with the hope of improving the overall well-being of LGBTQ plus people living in Rwanda. And thank you all for coming today. It was really difficult to pack 215 pages into 20 minutes. So I hope I was able to convey the research and look forward to your questions and feedback.
You did an excellent job, marvelous job. So thank you very much. Dr. McGurl, I will turn it over to you to lead now the question and answer period by the committee.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well done, Devin. I know we've been in communicating, going, I'm down to 30 minutes, I'm down to 25 minutes, and you did a sterling job there, so well done. As we say, we have roughly 30 minutes to explore. We don't have to use the full 30 minutes, but I'm sure there's lots of conversation to be had with the committee, and then I'll open up the floor to other attendees to ask questions if they so wish. So Dr. Cleve, Dr. Donato, would you like to lead with the questions?
Go ahead, Dr. Dentato.
Okay. Well, Devin, congratulations. I think you did a really splendid job. And again, combining such a lengthy and important topic into 20, 30 minutes is no easy feat. So nice work. My first curiosity kind of centers around navigating your own positionality, your own identities, your own biases as you were collecting data and conducting the research and analyzing the data. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you raised consciousness about this, and certainly how you helped kind of keep it in check as you proceeded in your work.
That's a good question. I identify as part of the community myself, which is, partially what guided me to do this sort of research. I have this connection, which, is something that also as a therapist, I realize at times can get me a little too attached to the people I'm working with, in this case, also the research. So in IPA, we use bracketing to sort of try to set aside some of ourselves. It's impossible to do that, but essentially, basically, at least if nothing else, to acknowledge when things are coming up, or say like in the interview I participated in, getting pretty connected with the participant, at least acknowledging that and trying then to not allow that to interfere with the process. That was also sort of a concern with the research associate doing most of the interviews. It was sort of a trade-off because she's Rwandan and speaks Kinyarwanda, and so me not participating also helped make the interviews a lot smoother. I think not having the translation back and forth and having someone they were comfortable with, and someone in person versus someone in person and someone online, with COVID kind of preventing me from being there. But she also, she had some training on IPA on how to conduct IPA research. We had an hour session after that first meeting for me to provide feedback and to help guide her to continue bracketing throughout the rest of the process too. So that was kind of mainly how we dealt with it.
Great. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. while we often focus on risk and risk factors, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you found to be the strengths and the resilience of the study sample, and certainly some connections we might make with regard to other members of the MSM community in Rwanda.
Yeah, so there was some valuable information related to that was not included to try to get in this 20 minutes. But the majority of participants actually said they have hope for the future. A lot of them, probably just under half, I think, had said that they feel like things have gotten better in recent years there, even though maybe things are starting kind of as they are here. Things are kind of hitting a plateau or maybe reversing in some ways. They're hopeful for the future. Some of them expressed hope that, same-sex marriage might become legal at some point. And some people noted also violence against trans women and gay men appears to have gone down, like maybe in the last 20 years or so there. And Rwanda is it's kind of like don't ask, don't tell policy that we had here. As long as you kind of do it in private and people don't find out about it and you can conceal it, it doesn't really impact you. But that kind of raises another point about participants who were excluded, who were trans. It just left out a piece of valuable information about concealable stigmatized identities and the fact that people who are unable to conceal them faced a whole lot more issues, violence, intimidation, things like that.
Well, since you brought it up, that was one of my reactions to your presentation. And I just wanted to say thank you for the way in which you addressed the silencing of trans identities. I think it was well stated and an important kind of moment in your presentation. So I know that the exclusion of those two participants was a difficult decision to make, but I appreciate the way in which you captured your need to do so in the presentation. I have one more question. I don't want to consume all the time of my dear colleagues, and certainly I can be shut down at any moment if that's necessary. Okay. So what was the biggest aha moment, Devin, where you're immersed in this work for so long, and sometimes it just becomes monotonous and it becomes so boring at times because you're just reading it and doing it over and over and over. What was the aha moment where you're like, wow, this is what it's all about. This is why I really wanted to do this, and this is why it has such meaning?
I think there were kind of a couple. There were maybe three aha moments. I think the first was the first interview I participated in, and getting to hear the story from somebody that probably never got to tell that story, at least not that fully, was very emotional. One of those cases where I had to, keep myself distanced to be able to continue in the process. But that really opened my eyes to, this person's experience in a place so different from where I come from. But at the same time, we share a lot of very similar experiences because, let's face it, in the United States, things aren't perfect, and they weren't perfect 20 or 30 years ago. So interesting to hear, to hear this person share experiences that I've had. That was kind of the first one. I think then when I got all of the transcripts and I started reading through each of them and hearing all of the stories, it also was kind of a huge, impact from, these emotional kind of testimonies of what people had gone through, especially the trans and gender non-conforming, non-participants, I guess, who, faced a lot of violence. I think the last one was really when I started doing the IPA coding and creating the themes and really getting a full picture of just sort of how, even though there's a lot of hope and there are a lot of, this isn't Burundi, this isn't the Congo, you can't technically be killed in Rwanda for being gay. There's not a ton of violence for being LGBTQ+. There's all of that hope surrounding that. But, creating those themes and kind of just really seeing that basically everybody's had negative experiences in healthcare. They're being dehumanized by professionals. They're being called slurs by their doctors and nurses and being laughed at when they're trying to get help. was very eye-opening. And again, that's something that I experienced here a long time ago, and it's just brought home why I chose to start over and lengthen my dissertation process by so many months, because somebody's got to do the research if anything's going to be done about it.
Thanks, Devin. That concludes my initial questions and comments. So thank you. I'll turn the program over to my colleagues.
Okay. Dr. Cleve?
Sure, thank you. First, I want to say that this is a wonderfully powerful study, and kudos for you to be willing to take it up and really carry the mantle, of providing a voice for the folks in Rwanda. And I think you articulated it so nicely in the written work and in your presentation today. So I think that it was a masterful job of taking on that challenge. In terms of questions, it feels like in the slides that you presented on friends and family and school and workplace, that the one thing that might be worth considering in the future is looking at disclosure decisions of how people arrive at that important point in their life. And I think it makes a big difference from a cultural standpoint. It mirrors exactly what goes on in Brazil and Turkey, which is where I did my research. And I'm wondering how do you think that could be built in towards a better understanding? And you so nicely articulated the gift our participants give us by providing their narrative. Do you feel like there would be some benefit in doing a study that really looked at that process, in addition to what the important work you just did?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's kind of the good thing about doing qualitative, this sort of IPA research, and giving people, 60 minutes to just tell their story instead of asking a lot of yes and no questions to, sometimes guide answers that we want. You kind of just get their full story, what they're willing to share. And so there are so many kind of offshoots of this that could happen as a result of the research. But their disclosure decisions, because, like I said, in schools, especially I think in school, when people are younger and they need the support of someone, they can't tell their friends, they can't tell their family, they can't be out in school because some of them said in Rwanda they could be suspended from school even if it was found out they're LGBTQ+, which is just, amazing. But how people arrived, because some participants did say that they were able to share maybe with like one person or with two people at school, and that had a positive impact, on their well-being. And all those people, basically all participants who concealed their identities in all these places, that negatively impacted them. So, what helps them to be able to come out to someone is really important to ensuring future well-being of the population. And that's something else that didn't make it into the presentation. But there were a couple things. One participant got referred to a therapist, was the only person who saw a therapist who was affirming to their identity. And that was like a miraculous change in this person's life. So, expanding access to those kinds of services and just having even a professional, even if you have to hide everything in your private life, having access to that outlet is really important. And also disclosure surrounding social media, which we didn't get to, but participants, especially the two participants who were excluded, that's kind of why I didn't include it in the presentation, because it was a little less relevant, but they really used social media to talk to other LGBTQ+ people in Rwanda, around the world, and for especially the trans and gender non-conforming people, that really made a huge difference in their life, because they were able to make friends with people maybe nearby that they could actually become real life friends with as well, without the fear and all of the other issues surrounding disclosure.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
In addition to that, I also want to clarify about the exceptions of asking you to leave out the transgender and gender nonconforming. That was the quickest path to get to today. It could have been part of the study had we gone back and done a lot of work in the writing. So, it wasn't silenced just for the purpose of saying, oh, well, they didn't meet inclusion criteria. It also involved the process of bringing a lot of information into chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. And we do very much want to honor, their voices. And then the final question I had for you, if we look at it culturally and through an IP lens, which is so important, that is separate from a national and ethnic cultural identity, if we look at the culture of LGBTQ, and this kind of tags on to Dr. Dentato's question, were you able to capture a sense that there are affirming organizations or places that they can go to congregate and to support each other? Do those exist in Rwanda?
Yeah, so I did get some of that information from the research or from, the data. And then I also just know of, outside of the research, kind of what exists there. But from the data itself, one participant did say there's an organization, I can't remember the name, that does have regular meetings for LGBTQ plus people. They're able to socialize and they promote advocacy and try to empower them to do what they can do in Rwanda to facilitate some of these changes. So there is at least this one organization, I think it's called Hope or Hope for Change or something. The clinical site that helped with the study has, I think, 3 locations, and they do LGBTQ plus outreach. Right now it's just,
how about things that are much more socially, like secret societies or being able to gather at someone's home or
so
things that we used to do in the US, and I hope we don't have to do again. But
yeah, that all seems to exist. Again, part of it's from the participants who ended up being excluded, which is why I didn't make it into the presentation. But they, basically, both had said that they live with, other people who know about their identities. Neighbors and people aren't really so nosy, is kind of how they put it. So they can have gatherings and have people over and nobody really asks questions. If you're not having a drag show in your front yard, then you're probably okay. But if you do something like that, there's probably going to be an issue. But there are definitely it's pretty much underground though, other than, even the outreach by the clinical site, it's like the last thing on their website. It's not some big banner that they're promoting for HIV and STD testing. They're kind of quietly doing the outreach to get to the population without raising too many alarms.
And in the humanistic psychology front, we think less about safe spaces and more about brave spaces to be able to identify and get out there. So I think it's important. And I also want to add a caveat that if you do presentations about your research, there's absolutely no reason you can't include the transgender and gender nonconforming people in it. The dissertation doesn't extend to your conversations and your ability to share this information. So nice job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, my turn.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to go back to the methodology a little. And IPA, you discussed why you chose IPA, and we had long conversations about it. I remember way back at the beginning, and I was just trying to think. It's like a double-barreled question. So you mentioned in your presentation about quantitative research and very structured questionnaires. You bring your own ideas, your own notions about what you're going to find out and what you're looking for. And it's one of the reasons I love IPA so much, is that you actually step back and find out things that you didn't know. So I wondered what the biggest surprise was for you, if you like, because you come to a topic with some preconceived notions about what you might find. What did the IPA methodology allow you to discover that you perhaps hadn't considered previously?
Well, based on kind of my experience and, you know, what I kind of knew of Rwanda and people I had talked to there, I was really assuming a lot of doom and gloom, that everything was going to be pretty horrible. You know, that we've come so far here, even though we're sort of backtracking in many ways. I was surprised by the resilience of the participants. I mean, really, the Rwandan people in general, that's something I felt just generally when we were in the country. I was so surprised by, with the genocide and everything they've gone through, how they carry on. And it's such a poor country, yet everyone is still happy and seems to not have some of the problems that we have in kind of our society. So the resilience, I think the hope for the future, the hope that things are going to get better there, the desire for a lot of participants to be involved in advocacy. And actually, some of them had such a really deep, good understanding of how advocacy works and what they can and should be doing. And it really, really resembled, you know, what has been happening here over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And some of the stuff that I, especially when I first moved to Chicago, had been active in doing, they're kind of following along in similar footsteps. So that was really super interesting to see. And also just the fact that participants did have some positive experiences. But, you know, those experiences were positive generally because they were hiding who they were. So that, you know, sadly has a negative impact on kind of all areas of your life.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we talked as well about how you would do the analysis, and it was debating whether to use some software like Vivo or whether to really get down in there and do a manual analysis. And we decided manual analysis. What are the pros and cons? I mean, if you did it again, would you do that? And yeah, just your thoughts about that. As my old professor said, Professor Hindsight is a very clever man. So going back, what would you do?
Well, if I knew then what I know now, I would have this amazing process that I developed that took a lot of struggle and kind of back and forth and having to kind of revisit data when I shouldn't have, because I didn't, you know, put things maybe in a spreadsheet the right way to kind of find what I was looking for. So I definitely, you know, the downfall of not using a software program is not having that data kind of coded and like very easy for you to like search and kind of find what you want to find. I'm going through, you know, 100 and some pages of my notes sometimes to find them. Like, I know somebody said this, but who said it? There are 8 people, and where is it? So there were times like that where I was like ripping my hair out. But I think the benefits is it really feels like using your hands, like you're really getting into the data and making hand notes. And I created this, you know, color symbol system that now is really fantastic to use. And if I do another IPA study again, I know exactly how to start instead of figuring out as we go. But I would definitely, as I'm creating statistics and putting together who said what, I definitely would chart it a little differently so that I could find it like in an Excel spreadsheet pretty easily. But I would definitely do IPA again. I love the process.
I was actually going to ask the exact same question, and because the other thing is it stores your data, electronically, and you can run reports with it. So
Right.
that's a big plus of it.
I think I kind of sent you in that direction because with the smaller samples, I really love them getting involved manually. I think you become much more familiar with the data and you kind of live the process rather than it being, and that's maybe my preference, I don't know. But nevertheless, I think you did pretty well with that. So
I think for like 10 or less people, it's an amazing way to work with the data. And I think another, reason I think I'm drawn to the process and all, the process of interviewing is it is very similar to like conducting a therapy session, which is what I do, and just giving the person the space to tell their story, which is a really powerful thing to do by itself. If I had done nothing else but allowed that space for the interviews, like that's already something meaningful for the people who participated, I hope.
Yeah. And that came through with the transcripts and the things that came out of it. I know people who are not so at ease with just letting somebody else lead a conversation. There's the need to control the process and ask the questions. I have a couple more questions, but I don't want to hog the limelight. And Dr. Cleve, Dr. Dentato, do you have any more questions?
Go ahead.
I just had one curiosity about when you were digging through the literature. Devin, did you find anything about migrant or immigrant or refugee Rwandan experiences anywhere across the globe outside of Rwanda? I was just curious if you found anything in that regard.
Really interesting you bring that up because no. And it's interesting because originally my research was working with LGBTQ plus refugees and migrants in the United States. So I had written the first 2 chapters and I literally didn't come across anything from Rwanda in that research.
Wow. Okay, so there's your next research study.
But one participant did say that they have heard that life for LGBTQ plus diaspora is much better than it is for those living in Rwanda. That's really kind of the only point about that I feel like that came up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I was curious too, and Dr. Pip, you might be able to help with this one, as to whether or not the colonization process of Rwanda, and if I remember correctly, it was Germany first and then Belgium that colonized Rwanda, and then they gained independence at the same time, like in the 60s, if I remember that right, where it kind of mirrored what was going on in the United States with, feeling independent and feeling the ability to explore sexuality in a different way. And I was just curious if that was available in the literature anywhere, if that maybe informed how Rwanda arrived at this really controlling space that they're in today. And that might be too broad of a question for this.
I think what stood out most, and it was Belgians that colonized and, I would say sort of planted the seeds for the genocide and, pitted these tribes against each other. And the result now is that in Rwanda, they don't really talk about what tribe they're from anymore. It's not really a thing.
Actually illegal.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So they basically, everybody is Rwandan. That is sort of the policy. And that's in the law. Like, you can't discriminate against any Rwandan, and it's a result of the genocide. So in an interesting way, that's what's protecting LGBTQ plus people, because they're saying, well, any Rwandan not just straight Rwandans. And so it is
Yeah.
providing this protection that might not otherwise exist. And that sort of, controlled, way that that's happening is maybe helpful in some ways. And who knows if that's going to explode at some point. But that's currently kind of, I think, where it's at. And people have said, and outside of this study, basically, that, if you basically kind of discreet about what you're doing, like, people are not going to cause a big stink. And I think it's partially because, all of this history and the violence that occurred there.
Yeah.
Thank
It's a
you.
very complex
Yeah.
situation, but it's Rwanda, one country, one people, and you can be imprisoned for separatism if you're promoting any other identity, other than Rwandan. So it's very complex. So on the surface, it's very Western looking. They're looking out to the West, trying to establish themselves as the financial hub of East Africa, and becoming a forward-thinking nation. But there's an undercurrent there that is still very stuck in the past, I think. But
Is the program still traveling to Rwanda, or is there a plan to?
we haven't since before the pandemic. 2019, I think, was the last time I went. But I won't be leading it this time. I've stepped away, but they're still in a state
Have
of.
Devin lead it.
We were talking about that.
We've talked about it, but there is an additional concern about me going back to the country once this is published. There are definitely some safety concerns. So I had wanted to, and it's still something I think about, but.
Yeah, in fact, we can talk about that. I think we could have a chat with JP about that. That's where things stand. So, yeah. I think it's probably time that we open the floor to other folks.
Yes.
I could always carry on forever.
No, this is fascinating. I mean, I think your study is fascinating. Your bravery is fascinating, and it's definitely needed, much needed study. We are now going to open it up to the public. So this is an opportunity to either ask questions of Devin or share your sentiments with him about anything. I just think it's an amazing study, Devin. So I'm excited about it.
Thank you so much.
So anyone from the public, you're free to share your cameras now. Yes, people have been muted for a while. And if not, we can have the committee going for a few more minutes. That's not an issue.
No?
Devin, do you think that your study will lead to other researchers following up and doing maybe a follow-up study?
I think so. I mean, I actually worked with the author of another study that worked with LGBTQ plus people, but kind of a different topic. So it's definitely, I think, happening. I think more than anything, especially because of the clinic that I worked with and the connections that I made while on the ground in Rwanda and through the research, I'm hoping to actually work with the clinical site to expand their services, their outreach, their training to include sensitivity for LGBTQ plus people. So if nothing else, to make some changes with that clinic, but also maybe with the University of Rwanda to try to change the curricula in the medical mental health programs. I think there's some hope that some of that might happen just as a result of this. But certainly, I mean, I myself might go back now that I kind of know what I know, and I, have this kind of issue still lingering with excluding those participants, going back and specifically doing a study to address their needs.
I love it. You know, it's interesting. A few years ago, I was teaching at, I designed some courses at a community college, a social science and sociology course. And when we got to the module on sexuality, I had quite a few students from the continent of Africa. And their response to me was interesting. They said it doesn't exist. And I said, it does exist. You know, it may not be. They said, well, it's illegal. It's illegal. You know, it just wouldn't happen. I don't understand why you're teaching about this. I said, just because it's not legal, it does exist. Right. And I said, and helping them to think about, don't you think that's really problematic then for individuals that are in the country that identify as a member of the LGBTQ community? And so we just finished leading a field experience to Ghana. And one of our students is a huge advocate for LGBTQ communities in Philadelphia, but she had actually connected with someone who had an underground kind of network for individuals to kind of provide assistance to them in Ghana. And so getting to meet him and really understanding how important the study that you did and this work is so important in many regions around the world, because I think we take for granted here in the United States, right, the freedoms that exist, and you know, from a legal perspective here in the United States, that many regions around the world are just not afforded that same opportunity. And so, like I told the student, I said, you know, just because it's illegal does not mean that they're not members of this community. And so now let's start to think about how this is adversely impacting their lives. Let's think about how painful that must be to have to live in a country where you are essentially not able to be yourself and be free. So I really applaud the work that you're doing again.
And thank you. That raised another point. Something that I thought would come up that I forgot about was the barriers I found even getting permission to do the study and working through IRB here, which was its whole thing, and then working through a similar ethical review process in Rwanda. There was a committee, I think, of 10 people who approved the research. They meet monthly, and my clinical site, you know, kind of worked with me to get through that process. But I was warned by my clinical site before going in to present my research that 90%, so like 9 out of 10 of the people on the committee were openly hostile to LGBTQ plus rights or believed that they don't exist at all. So the presentation was very contentious. There were slurs, there was a whole lot of pushback, and it took several months to ultimately get the approval, which many times I didn't think was ever going to happen.
Wow.
Yeah,
Devin,
even
this is
the
what
government.
dissertations are made of. I have to tell you, and I'm sure your chair is so proud of you and your committee, but this is what really makes a researcher, a lifelong researcher. The steps that you had to go through and your bravery in doing this study is an honor. It really is.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Indeed.
Any final words from the committee before we conclude for today?
I would just echo what you said. You know, it's been a delight working with Devin. He's been open to all of the ups and downs of this process and has navigated it with professionalism, maturity, and independence. You know, there are many students where you handhold all the way, but Devin has taken this and run with it and problem solved and come back to me going, oh, I'm so fed up, I'm still waiting, or that didn't go so well, did it? But, you know, hands down, fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Dr. Pip too. All of you, really.
Thank you. Well, at this time, we will conclude the dissertation defense. We are going to ask that everyone leave, including you, Devin, and the committee will remain with Victoria. Victoria, are you there? Making sure you're still here. I'm sure she is. The committee will remain. Okay, there she is. Okay. I'm like, let me make sure she's still there. The committee will remain with Victoria, and Devin, then you will hear from Dr. McGurl later on.
Okay. Are we going to bring Devin back in, or?
No, he will not come back but you will be able to contact him thereafter, unless you decide something with Victoria. I will leave it up to the committee and Victoria.
Okay,
So you
that's
can.
great.
Okay, so Devin, if they want you, they will contact you to rejoin. Okay,
Awesome.
no.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Devin.
Thanks, Devin.
Here.
Sorry,
Woohoo!
you're able to
Work.
get everybody else out in case they don't leave. Okay.
Mhm.
Yep. I only see one person left.